I've done a few videos on this plant, but I have to include it in this series because I think it's one of the best wild edibles that we have in the UK. This is sea beet. If I could only forage for 10 wild foods, this one would be up near the top. It is a lovely plant. It's the wild ancestor of spinach, but I think it's a lot better, a lot tastier than spinach, and it doesn't wilt down when you cook it. You can harvest sea beet all year round, but I find this time of year is the best because there's lots of fresh growth, and you can just see how fresh this is. You don't really get vegetables this fresh in the supermarket. You can tell this will be very nutritious. So sea beet, as you can tell by the name, it's a coastal plant, and you can also find it in estuaries. An easy way to identify sea beet is that it has long petioles or leaf stems, and the leaves grow decurrently down the stem, so it looks like they have wings. There's not really much that you can mistake this for as long as it's got a long petiole. The leaves are triangular to diamond shaped, and they can grow quite large. These are still very young fresh leaves, but they do grow quite a lot bigger than this. And they've got quite a wavy margin and a waxy feel to the leaves, especially on more mature leaves. The young leaves like this, I'll just eat raw. Anything from about this size and larger, I'll cook them just like you would spinach. So pretty much anything that you'd use spinach in, you can use sea beet. So if you're lucky like me and you live either by the coast or an estuary, you'll never have to buy spinach again. So just look in amongst the rocks like these here, or check in soil and sand around the coast above the high tide line. The best part of this plant though, in April you start getting these stems that are quite thick. These are the flower stems, but you want them before they start flowering. So about this stage here. And these are possibly one of the best wild edibles that you can find. They're up there with any vegetable that I serve in restaurants. There's another really nice one there. So you can see that's where the flowers will be coming from soon. The great thing is this time of year they're really abundant. So to cook these shoots, first of all just give them a bit of a rinse, and you just do it in a similar way to things like purple sprouting broccoli. So just get a pan, a really small amount of water, chuck in a few of the shoots like that, and you just want to steam them for a couple of minutes. So it's been about 2 minutes, just so they start to go a bit looser, not so rigid. And just take them out. And just get a bit of butter. You want that butter so it's foaming. And then just get your shoots, place them in that hot butter. And that will crisp them up a bit. You want to do this on a really high heat. And really importantly, you don't want to add any seasoning. These are already quite salty. Most sea veg is quite salty. So if you add any salt to this, they'll be really over salty. That's been about another 2 minutes in the pan. Once you start to see a bit of a browning on the stem, then they're ready. And these go as a side dish for anything really, but they go really well with fish. These are St. George's mushrooms, a really good edible spring mushroom. They get their name because of the time of year they grow, around St. George's Day or late April, but they can also be found throughout May. So the time of year is a good ID feature for them, as there aren't many other mushrooms around this time of year. When picking white gilled mushrooms, you have to be really careful of deadly members of the Amanita family, but it's unlikely you'll find them in spring. St. George's mushrooms grow in open grasslands or the edges of deciduous woodland. They can grow in fairy rings and will often grow in the same spot every year. They grow out of the soil, not out of rotting wood. The cap of the mushroom is convex. They're rounded and sometimes slightly misshapen with a wavy edge. They're white to cream colour, but they go slightly brown as they mature, and they have an in-rolled margin. The gills are white to cream and they're very crowded. The stipe is the same colour as the cap, and it doesn't have a ring, and it can be quite curved. The flesh is soft and white, and it feels quite dense, and there's a high ratio of flesh to gills. It's got quite a strong mealy smell, so like raw flour. So it's really important that you check right at the base of the stem. So the amanitas, like the death cap or destroying angel, they will have an egg cup at the base or a vulva. The St. George's won't have this, so just be very careful of that. It's a really nice tasting mushroom. They do need cooking a bit longer than your standard like shop bought mushrooms because the flesh is quite dense, but they're really nice fried with shallots and pancetta, then cooked out with a white wine and cream sauce and served with pasta. Some tree leaves are edible, and in April a few of them are just starting to open up. It's best to try and get them as early in the season as possible. For me, the best of the edible tree leaves are beech. If you catch them just at the right time, they have a lovely sweet flavour with a bit of a citrusy aftertaste. And when they're really young, they're almost translucent. I think they're one of the best salad greens that we have in the UK, and you can make beech leaf noyu with them, a alcoholic drink. I've done a video on how to make that. Beech have long, straight trunks with a smooth grey bark. Most of their foliage is at the top, but they quite often have quite low hanging branches that you can collect leaves from. Just don't take too many from one tree, just take a few and then move on, just grazing like animals do. And I try to avoid taking any from younger trees because they need all the energy they can get from these leaves when they're younger. Here's one of the buds that's just starting to open up. And beech has an alternate budding arrangement. Here's a good example of that. So it'll bud on one side of the branch, then the other, going up the stem. Beech leaves are oval and have a wavy margin, and they have diagonal veins. And if you look closely at the edge of the leaf, when they're young, they have a hairy edge to the leaf. They lose those hairs as the leaf matures. So when you find a good beech woodland like this, take note of it, and then it's a good place to come back in the autumn because beech woodland is really good for mushroom foraging. Oak leaves are edible when they're very young. At this sort of stage here, after they've just opened, they're okay to eat in small amounts. The tannins make them fairly bitter, although at this stage there's not too much bitterness to them. Once they're more than a few weeks old, they're no good to eat anymore. They are medicinal. They're good for sore throats. So you can eat them as a salad green, but I'd recommend mixing them in with other sweeter greens. And they're good for making a tea with, for soothing a sore throat. And also you can make oak leaf wine with them, which is really good. But only eat them in a small amount and not when they're fully mature, because the tannins can cause a stomach upset. Spring is the time for morel mushrooms, but there are some deadly poisonous lookalikes, so be very careful. Even the edible morels are poisonous when raw or even undercooked. They'll cause severe stomach upsets when undercooked, so again, be very careful. These are black morel, Morchella elata. They're much more common in man-made habitats, especially garden wood chip. You're much more likely to find them in an urban environment than in the wild. You'll find them from around March to May, April being the best month for them. The cap is a mass of honeycomb-like pits, and the edges of the pits become darker as the mushroom matures. And the flesh on the inside of the pits is usually a lighter colour. A good way to tell it's a black morel from other morels is that they have roughly straight vertical lines running up the mushroom, like this here. The cap is usually roughly conical, so wider at the base, narrower at the top, though each mushroom does vary in shape quite a bit. Now, very importantly, true morels are hollow on the inside. So the false morel, which is deadly poisonous, will have a network of hollow chambers on the inside. It's not actually hollow like this. I've never actually found false morel, I've only ever seen pictures of them, so I can't really show them to you here, but definitely look them up if you want to forage morels. The black morel has white flesh on the inside and it has a very faint mushroomy smell. The stem is an off-white to cream colour and it is hollow on the inside. And the stem widens at the top to meet the cap. The common morel can look quite similar to the black morel and is also a good edible, but it doesn't have these vertical ridge lines and it's usually a paler colour. If you're pan frying them, just make sure that you cook them thoroughly. As they're hollow, it's good to cut them open and stuff them with some herbs and cheese, put them back together and then poach them in stock. They also dehydrate really well, and the flavour is intensified when they're dried. So back in March I showed you the purple dead nettle. I said it looks a little bit similar to stinging nettle, but these ones are white dead nettles and they look almost identical to stinging nettles. So you see the leaves of the dead nettle here, they don't sting, and this one here is a stinging nettle. And they're almost identical. If it wasn't for the white flowers on the dead nettle, it'd be very difficult to tell them apart. So these are edible, the greens and the flowers. The flowers vary in taste. They can either be quite sweet or they can taste a bit like mushroom. Depends mainly on what time of day. Like in the mornings they're usually quite sweet, and then later on in the day they get a sort of mushroom flavour. You can get really big patches of these dead nettles, pretty much all the way up the side of this path. As I said with the purple dead nettle, these aren't related to stinging nettles. They're actually a member of the mint family. So if you check the stem, you'll see it's square. This is Honesty, Lunaria annua, a member of the cabbage family. The leaves and flowers have a mild cabbage flavour. You'll find it grown along pathways and roadsides, anywhere that gets a lot of sunlight. The leaves are serrated and pointed, and they look quite similar to the upper leaves of garlic mustard. And they're cordate or heart-shaped at the base. The flowers, like all brassicas, have 4 petals in a cross, or cruciform flowers, and they're heavily veined. The flowers can either be purple or white. You get quite a lot of flowers on each stem. They're quite dense clusters. This is a wild cherry, Prunus avium. And in April the tree is covered in the white blossoms that you can see from a long way off. And these blossoms are edible. They make a good tea and they can be used to make jam. They're popular in Japanese cuisine. Cherry trees normally have masses of blossoms, but still don't take too many off a single tree, especially if you want to be having cherries later in the year. What I'll actually normally do is just take the petals off the flower and leave the rest of the flower intact, because that can still be pollinated. And in fact it probably already is pollinated, because I've been hearing buzzing around this tree for a good week now. So the chances are most of these flowers are already pollinated, and if you don't take the whole flower off, then you'll still get a cherry there. Wild cherry flowers have 5 white petals and they hang in clusters. And the leaves are just starting to open this time of year as well. They're oval and serrated. And if you look at the base of the leaf, you'll see 2 red glands, which is another good identifier of cherry. Now, I don't actually eat cherry leaves. I've read conflicting evidence. Some say it's edible, some say it's mildly toxic, because there's a chemical in the leaves and the stones of the cherries that can cause your body to create cyanide. So this is one I'll not put in my basket. Cherry has quite a distinctive looking bark with almost like a tiger stripe pattern and horizontal lenticels. It's really common and native to the UK. You'll find it in woodlands and parks. In parks and gardens, you'll also see the Japanese flowering cherry, Prunus elata. It's a non-native cherry with double-petalled pink or white flowers. This is miner's lettuce, Claytonia perfoliata, also known as winter purslane. It's a really nice succulent salad plant. You'll find it growing throughout spring. It's at its best around April, early May. So it looks to grow in dry, well-drained soil or sand, and you'll often find it around the coast in the sand dunes, and it likes partial shade. So the young leaves form a basal rosette, and they have a long leaf stem. They're oval to triangular, and they can often have a pinkish tinge to the plant, especially during a dry spell. As the plant matures, it will send up multiple flower stems. The stem leaves are actually a pair of leaves that fuse around the flower stem to form a disc. The stem leaves are succulent and fleshy, and the stem protrudes through the leaves, and that's called a perfoliate leaf. The flowers are small and white, and they have 5 petals, and the petals are slightly notched. The flowers grow in 2 tiers. First of all, they'll grow in the cup of the stem leaves. Then the stem will protrude through the leaf and will grow a second tier of flowers. The upper and lower leaves, as well as the flowers, are good eaten raw, and they're very nutritious. They're really full of vitamin C. I like to toss them in olive oil and lemon juice and use them as a salad garnish, and they're also really good in green smoothies.